So now we're going to be live streaming.
I'm sorry.
Now we're going to be live stream on YouTube.
Okay,
So anybody that wanted to log in. just
thank you.
say,
Good.
don't know.
Does it do many?
You can't really tell how many people log in.
Yeah,
You can afterwards, yeah, you can,
Yeah,
and
afterwards.
it'll say how many people have viewed it, yeah,
Okay,
yeah, because they can watch it afterwards too.
all right. Very well.
So, we'll kind of doing it.
Thank you.
That's soft now, good. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Welcome back, Sunit. And I guess Wayne didn't join us either, so moving on, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands of the First Nations and has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. In particular, I acknowledge the history, spirituality, and culture of the territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the Three Fires, known as the Ojibwe, Adawa, and Potawatomi Nation, and further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen, Chippewas of Nawash, known collectively as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this area, as well as the contributions of the Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples whose ancestors shared these lands and waters. May we live in respect for each other on this land and live in peace and friendship with all of its diverse peoples. Miigwech. Prior to today's meeting, the board met in closed sessions to review and discuss matters that, in their opinion, fell under Section 44 of the Community Safety and Policing Act and Section 24, Item B of the Owen Sound Police Services Board General Policy 003, Board Governance. Moving on, if I could approval of the agenda, and I'd just like to add one item, item 14, and it's a report from our Human Resources Manager that will be added to that area. So Ian, if I could have a motion.
So I'll move that with that amendment, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Bev, seconder, thank you. All in favor, carried. Declaration of conflict of interest arising out of the minutes and matters listed on the agenda. Hearing none. Presentations, deputations, and public question periods. We have no presentations, deputations, or public questions at this time. Confirmation of the minutes of the public session held October 8th, 2024. Sunit, thank you. And seconder, Bev, thank you. All in favor, carried. Is there any business arising out of the public session minutes from October 8th? Hearing none. Correspondence received. There was no correspondence received requiring the board's direction or review. Moving on to number 9, Chairman's Report. As I mentioned earlier, it's been pretty quiet since our October meeting. Next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, Craig and I are attending the Ontario Association of Police Service Boards Labor Conference in Toronto. And on the Monday, I have an OSPSB board meeting. On Tuesday, December the 10th, I have a Zone 5 meeting. And the last Zone 5 meeting we had was March 12th. And that's CSP came into force April 1st, 2024. And due to changes with the OPP detachment boards structure, most zone meetings in the province had to be canceled. Detachment boards now have their boards in place, and we are back to meeting quarterly, assuming everything goes well by the December date. Governance, Dave Preston will be attending our December meeting. Dave's our policy writer guy, and he will have a list of updated policies that he's updated as a result of the new CSP coming into force in April. Most of it is just cosmetic with changes to PSA to CSPA. Moving on to number item 11, reports from Inspector Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, we changed a few of the board meeting dates around to the point, I don't think we missed a meeting, but we were able to sneak both October and November into this meeting just because we ended up with some different date shifting. So I'm going to cover off quickly to September and October in this meeting. You'll see I've started compressing I used to report individually on the homicides. I've sort of compressed it down into 3. For our new board member, in summer of 2023, we had 3 homicides within around a 6-week window, which is unprecedented. That would be taxing for any service, perhaps below the size of Toronto. In a small to mid-sized service like us, it is just absolutely consuming as far as the amount of work that needs to come in for homicide. Just as a reference to that, I think the year before we had a homicide, but prior to that, it was 7 years since the last one. So the amount of work that goes into one of these is phenomenal, and it continues. These are now getting close to 15, 16 months old. We still have a number of people working on them regularly, and we're just now starting to see court kick in. So in fact, this week, there's a preliminary hearing going on for one of the persons charged from one of the homicides. So our CIB members have been up in court all day just on that process. And with all of these processes, there are more than one person charged, which makes that even more complicated when you get into court, because they can all have separate hearings, trials, and things like that. It just magnifies the caseload workload that comes as a result of that. So the thing that's going on this week is for one of 3 persons charged in one of 3 homicides. So anyway, they continue on, and they still continue to cause us a lot of demands with respect to staffing. Very briefly, the remainder is on there. I know you have looked at these before. Identity fraud and other frauds, we are certainly seeing an uptick in the last year. As I think they are across the province and the country, a lot of this stuff ends up being overseas based and becomes very difficult for us to be able to deal with. But I think everybody knows that that's becoming a bigger and bigger thing with some of the overseas boiler rooms that are either reaching out to some of the elderly or vulnerable populations and having some degree of success with them. So that is certainly something that we're seeing here as well. Sudden death investigation and remainder, I'm just going to move on. I'm going to touch on the drug overdose information in a later report that I've also submitted. So for the October report, again, there's nothing there that's going to jump out that I need to discuss other than the regular items that they've been working that you already looked at, continuing to be receiving sudden deaths. And with respect to the, again, drug overdose, it's covered later. We are pushing up to the point that I think we will meet or exceed the worst year that we had, which was 2021. November's got another one in it, so we're sitting at 13 deaths this year. Our big year was 2022, or sorry, 2021, right in the middle of COVID, where we had 14, and I think we're on par to at least meet or exceed that, which is not good news as far as that goes. So, unless there's any questions with respect to CIB, we'll move on to the auxiliary. For our new member, we maintain an auxiliary unit here that usually floats around the 17 to 18 member unit. Those are volunteer positions that are appointed by the board, and it allows for them to assist police officers, and we utilize them for events where there's high staffing demand, such as the Santa Claus Parade, Canada Day, things like that, where we bring informed auxiliary members out. They also come in on a fairly regular basis and right along with our police officers and assist them in that manner as well. So we always report on the number of hours, and it is significant. So for September, 224 hours, we always list a few of the key items that they've done. And for October, another 213 volunteer hours put in. Moving into December, it's sort of a keystone event for our auxiliary. You will see them out for a number of different weekends. They run a auxiliary food drive in conjunction with the Salvation Army that's always very successful. So we'll report on that at the end of December, but there is always a very significant amount of food that's collected on behalf of the Salvation Army and on by auxiliary. So we look forward to reporting on that later. I didn't bring the stats, Chief, but I know I did something up for you, in terms of I added up a 12-month window of the number of hours. It's very significant, to the point that I applied a first-class constable salary to it too, and we paid for it. It was something like $137,000 would be the cost of that free volunteer hours that we do have put in. So it's very significant. I also report on a couple of other units, one being the Community Oriented Response and Enforcement Unit, or what we call the CORE unit. CORE unit was reestablished a number of years ago based on a grant that we received. This is what we refer to as our proactive enforcement. Most of our officers are tied to the radio and calls. The call volume that we have here, you're simply going from call to call to call. And it takes away our ability to be able to actually have a proactive response, to be able to do some of the things like downtown foot patrol and dealing with some of the trouble spots that we have throughout the city on a regular basis. So the CORE unit came back in almost 3 years ago. We have a couple of officers, would normally have a couple of officers assigned there. Much of the, as we've already touched on the homicide, much of our proactive response unfortunately was consumed by dealing with those homicides, but we are slowly starting to get back to where we have them up and running again. So we report on the number of foot patrol hours and a lot of the proactive items that are happening. As the chief mentioned earlier, because we are still on a grant, there has been, and this grant will terminate for us on March 31st, but there's been a lot of comments made about additional staffing that's been seen in the community in the downtown areas, and that's with us being able to have staff based on that grant and being able to pick up on some of the hours that that supplies. So again, that applies to the October report for CORE and yes.
CORE means, and CORE does what?
CORE is the community oriented response and enforcement. Now, we also received a grant 1 year ago that the province put out, which was to help with bail compliance and warrant apprehension. So we have officers that are assigned to that as well. Again, that's a proactive function. The reality is we have a very large number of outstanding arrest warrants, and a lot of people get released from court now that are out on terms to whatever those terms might be. Without a proactive enforcement piece, it's very difficult to go knock on a door and see if somebody is complying with their house arrest or those sorts of things. So we have an officer that's assigned right now to the bail compliance and warrant apprehension unit, and you always see some very big numbers coming across from that. Again, grant funded, but for example, in the month of September, that officer with assistance, 52 criminal charges, 21 warrant arrests, 16 compliance checks. So that's something that we, for the most part, wouldn't have operated without the assistance of that grant.
Would it be fair to say that CORE is the face of policing in the River District?
Yes, it would. We, in terms of the foot patrols, what that allows is CORE to have a little bit more flexibility in terms of when those foot patrols happen. So we've always had foot patrols happening with patrol as time permits, but often for patrol and time permits is could be 7:30 in the morning or something like that before the calls start coming in. And our typical busy period is when no doubt they would like to see more foot patrols because it's busy, but it's driven by the call volume and that sort of thing. So often our foot patrol hours, even though they're being done, are not at the peak hours that we'd like to see them. So that's where the CORE flexibility really assists us.
And probably also if they're sort of in that 10 till 2 time frame or 9 till 2, if they're visible downtown, it gives not only the business owners but the public more of a sense of not feeling unsafe because they see police officers around, and if they need something, it's going to happen. So I think, you know, to lose core, just because the grant isn't there. I think it's very important that we keep core on the street and in the face of the public.
Yes, I agree.
Well, I've got feedback from downtown business owners, so they were very happy when they needed help. There was somebody there quickly with the core unit, and that's sort of the whole idea of
Yeah.
responding to the.
That's my report, unless there's any questions. Carlos?
Moving on to reports from Inspector Flutie.
Thank you. As Dave said, 2 months worth of reports covering September and October, so I'll try to be brief. For frontline patrol and collision statistics, for the 4 platoons, so we have 4 what we call platoons here, or shifts, that cover all the patrol activities, and there's 6 officers on each. And we also have part-time officers who supplement the front line. We have 5 of those officers. So during the month of September, there was 123 Highway Traffic Act charges laid, 114 cautions issued, 14 Liquor License Act charges, 99 Criminal Code charges, 30 other Provincial Offences Act and bylaw charges, and 94 hours of foot patrol. For ride checks, there was 12 on-duty rides with 244 drivers checked, and there was 4 impaired driving charges laid during the month. For collisions, in September, we had 46 collisions, 16 on the east side, 13 on the west side, and 17 in parking lots. 22 of those collisions were handled by our collision reporting center. So we have a reporting center where the involved parties can come to the station and process the accident report there and have photographs taken. And 24 of the collisions were investigated by our officers. And quite often those are cases where the vehicles aren't drivable and they can't get to the station, or there's significant damage there. So moving on to October's report, we had 107 Highway Traffic Act charges laid, 87 cautions, 8 Liquor License Act charges, 109 Criminal Code charges, and 101 hours of foot patrol. We had 25 on-duty ride checks with 829 drivers checked. There was 29 Highway Traffic Act charges or warnings issued during those ride programs, and 3 impaired driving charges were laid during the month. 49 collisions that month, 27 on the east side, 9 on the west side, and 13 in parking lots. And half of those collisions were handled by the CRC and 26 by our officers. If there's no questions, I'll move on to community services. So during September, Jason got the Youth and Policing Initiative up and going again. It's a student program where he has students come and work with him doing community service activities. He delivered presentations to the Bruce Grey Catholic District School Board, an all-day presentation on social media awareness and internet safety, presentation to the Ontario Women's Retired Teachers on frauds and scams. He was at Georgian College at their EA program, presenting on personal and online safety, and also bus patrol safety at Eastridge. He attended 2 conferences, the Safety of Our Cities Conference with Chief Ambrose and myself, and the Diversity and Belonging Conference. And there's some photographs with his submission. Our back to school focused traffic enforcement around the schools for the safety of the students, and also at a graduation at the Ontario Police College where we had 3 recruits graduate from the program there. For October, his students and himself were at Bayfield Landing at a youth program there that they were running. There was presentations on the East Ridge Blue Locker project. I did bus patrol training at East Ridge and Hillcrest, at St. Dominique on safe schools, an Alzheimer's workshop on missing persons, and a presentation at Central Place on common frauds. That's it for community services. For lost hours in training, this is a report that covers absences, sick time, WSIB for the service. There was 15 members reported sick or injured during September, affecting 50 shifts, equaling 545 hours. We had 2 persons on WSIB for a total of 336 hours. That was up over the previous month and up over the same time, September 2023. For training during September, we had members attend the following courses: the coaching police professionals course so that they can train new recruits, the crisis negotiator course, hate crime conference, the NENA conference, which is the National Emergency Number Association, Safety of Our Cities Conference, Diversity and Belongings Conference, and we had 3 recruits on their basic training at the police college. In October, for sick time, we had 16 members report sick or injured for a total of 484 hours, and 2 persons on WSID. Training courses, the hate crime course was attended, criminal investigation techniques course, search warrant. All the staff here had block training, which included mental health and resilience training with the contracted counselors with the police service, and our recruits continued their studies at the police college. That concludes my reports.
Thanks, Jeff. Any questions from anyone? Moving on, reports from Director of Civilian Services, Christopher Luna.
Cover that off very quickly.
Okay.
Just a quick little highlights that I will do here. Director Flooney noted that on our bulk records check searches, she always reports on the numbers that we do for our new board member. That's also a revenue stream that we have coming in terms of we receive compensation for doing those searches. So it's always good to see those numbers. Although our month to month over the previous year is slightly down for October, you'll see the 2024 overall stats. We are somewhere around 5% higher than we were last year, so that's good to see. Moving down onto that graph, where you see in March where we have a huge spike. I believe that was when hurried to the bail compliance and warrant apprehension unit in and around there. So that just shows you the impact of having an officer working on that for proactive response. Something like about 120 outstanding warrants that were all executed within that month. The remainder, there is not a lot out of whack, although you will notice on the custodies transported, the number has spiked. That's a reflection of moving the back into the in-person occurrences for the courts. During COVID, everything was put off site and done by Zoom, and they're just now starting to get back to where they are bringing those persons into the courts. So you'll see the number of transported being spiked up there. I think with the exception of that, the report is as tendered, unless there's any questions.
Just now, speaking of transport, prisoner transport, would now be a good time to maybe talk about the one in Niagara? Transportation back and forth,
And
just to
so-
give people an idea of how it impacts the courts on our bottom line and the cities.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we're currently facing is an individual who's, for preliminary hearing is being held in custody, outside well near Farmville. And, it's requiring prisoner transport daily back and forth for appearances. This is a preliminary hearing, but should he remain in that facility and come back for a lengthy trial in relation to his outstanding charges, would be a significant demand and probably sometime into next year. And the hours associated, it's at least, with no traffic, it's gonna be at least a 3-hour drive. Probably closer to 4-hour drive, and with traffic, it can be significantly more than that, so those demands and the location of that are certainly a driver that we don't control on our end, but it's necessary to get the individual here every day for court, so that's just an example of one of the issues that we are facing and really have no control over.
Who does?
There was a time when there were a lot more facilities available within the province, and those facilities obviously were closer to each geographic area of the courthouse, and now there certainly are more limited. They're consolidated, and that creates issues as far as custody. Like our main, for your information, our main holding facility for adults is Penetanguishene. So everybody gets transported daily from One Sound Court, Washington Court over to Penetanguishene, and so there's lengthy delays, and then the bad weather, there's oftentimes where they can't transport, so that creates issues for us. And just in, it ended up not being 4 hours, 4 days this week, it ended up being 3 days this week, but because of court delays, but 3 days back and forth, 6 hours, at least 7 hours a day driving, 2 people doing the escort, plus the wear and tear on the vehicle and everything else. It's a significant demand. If that's gonna go to a full-blown trial, it's gonna be significant cost.
Because we talked about the demands of homicides, that's one of the cases
Mhm.
that's coming out of that, it's causing that for us.
Craig, at one time, this is going back to Tom K days, and here there's some discussion about having a regional holding cell here in the building for things like this. I guess the province didn't allow it, or like it would just make so much sense, obviously. The province decided to close county jails for provincial expenses. It didn't really compensate municipalities and lower tiers for all the costs that went with that.
If I can comment on that, it's an interesting discussion because it's come up even with a recent homicide case that was being held in the courts, and there were arguments by the defense lawyer that even transporting back and forth to Penetanguishene wasn't appropriate, wasn't sufficient because of the time spent in the early morning pickup, late, court goes late after a homicide trial, late arrival, missing meals, having to take meals en route, they asked about a local facility to house that individual, and there's nothing in place. That wasn't an on-sound police service case. They asked us about housing the individual. Wasn't getting into that, given the liability issues and everything else. And we don't have a proper facility that an individual can have a shower. We can arrange for some types of meals that could be brought in, and we don't have, and our cells are the basics, to secure an individual, but they don't have any other further amenities than that. And so it was a lengthy discussion at the courts about that issue, and that was just on the Penetanguishene transport on an ongoing basis. So I anticipate that's going to become something that's going to be discussed in a number of upcoming trials.
My recollection was that Chief K was talking about an expansion or changing the facilities to be able to provide, to be more than just an overnight holding cell. That's it's at least 10 years ago.
Yeah,
I just remember that coming up at the time.
there have been no discussions in my time here, but certainly there would be cost concerns in regard to the construction as well as the proper supervision, because our staffing model doesn't anticipate having somebody here and having to meet their needs of going out and using the shower and making sure that they have meals and all those things, and unless the province was gonna staff within our building, that would be a concern to me.
Yeah.
Because we're not trained and we're not, our cell monitors aren't jail or professional guards.
Okay. Any other questions? Sinead, anything from your side? Okay,
I would highlight the number of individuals who are being transported and the number of in-person appearances in court and how high it is compared to the previous year and how it's returning. It's actually probably at least or higher than pre-COVID. And the court security demands and the number of officer hours up at courts are increasing dramatically as a result. And I'll also comment that the more serious the charges, the more serious the security issues. And with the homicides coming up, those demands are gonna be higher this week. Right now, the security demands are extraordinary for this current preliminary hearing, and that if that goes to trial, or if any of these go to trial, it's gonna significantly impact the court security budget and the number of hours and officer hours up at courts. So when there is that fallout, that not only do we lose investigators, but all the way through, that cost gets passed along. So we'll give a financial update and we'll see where we sit for court security this year, but I anticipate it will go up again next year. And really, we have very little control over court security. We have to provide it under the act, and we do provide good court security, but it's meeting the needs of the courts. And you see the courts, the numbers of transports are way up over previous year. And last year we said, well, we're coming back to the levels that we were pre-pandemic, and so you can see that those numbers are still coming back even further.
great. Moving on to a report from Director of Corporate Services, and Craig, are you going to take that, or Dan?
Doesn't matter.
So the biggest news with the communications center obviously was reaching the milestone this past month with the opening of the newly renovated communications center. There was a celebration for this on October 25th. Following that, we transitioned to full operations in the new location on October 29th. And there's some photographs from that day there for you with the grand opening. There's lots of stats and graphs here for the number of calls, etc., coming into the communication center. I'll just touch on some. So in September and October, the average daily number of incoming 911 calls to the center dropped below 200 after summer peak rates, with 5,600 emergency calls coming in from the 911 phone line, including answerable and non-answerable calls in October. This was an average of 181 emergency calls per day during October, compared to 197 a day last month and 183 last October. Year to date, the total volume of incoming 911 calls are down by 15%, partly due to the high volume of non-answerable 911 calls in 2023. For example, year to date in 2024, there have been 5,059 non-answerable 911 calls compared to 8,915 at the same time in 2023. So that's the non-answerables is your pocket dials, the accidental calls, and that, so we're not getting as many. Just looking at some of the numbers, in, October of, 2024 for police calls, that's all police services. There was 5,651 in October. In September, 5,715. And that's up over the same time last year for both of those months with a 3.7% increase. So still very busy with increasing call volume there. And there's further graphs and stats included in the report for your review.
Thanks, Jim. Moving on to report from Director Hill.
That's combined now with the.
Oh, okay. So there's nothing specific then from Chris.
Do you want me to go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay. So during September and October, the IT department is heavily involved in the completion of the new communications center. This involved the installation of 40+ computers to 8 and soon to be 10 desks, as well as wall displays, custom wiring, etc. IT participated in demonstrations of the new records management system that all users will be moving to in 2025, as well as a tow truck insurance portal to simplify dispatching and records management. There was substantial next-gen 911 requirements for our own systems, as well as our hosted partners. This required visits to Eastern Ontario with fiber cable design and network programming, and documentation for approximately 12 locations and 40 devices. Our IT department attended the Grey County Emergency Resource Workshop and led a team consisting of OPD County and municipal representatives in an ice storm situation involving prolonged outages and degradations of service. And the IT department has been preparing for our computer-aided dispatch, which is scheduled for the end of November, and affects both ourselves and all of our dispatch partners in delivering the latest version of software and functionality. Requires the replacement of 14 terminals and related servers and programming. That's it for IT.
Okay, good. Did you want to bring up that report from Wendy? It's on the stick.
Second.
Sorry. Next one down. Yep.
Okay.
Sure.
So I apologize, the newer one that I didn't get, it was with me, my apologies, I didn't get the forwarded, but this is a new report from our human resources manager. And this talks about some of the initiatives that we've been doing internally. There's a member wellness event with the Owen Sound Attack and the hockey game. And it was well attended by Owen Sound police service members and their families, as well as other Grey Bruce first responders. We had several local vendors in attendance promoting healthy activities such as rock climbing, running, yoga, gym memberships, martial arts, services such as physiotherapy, chiropractic, osteo, and counseling, and support systems. So that was a very well attended event. There were over 200 first responders across Grey Bruce that took part in that event, in that activity. Including, it was just over 50 from or connected to Owen Sound Police. We also had the trial the use of a therapy dog from St. John's Ambulance Program. And they came to visit the station on October 18th, meeting with different members in all departments. The feedback was very positive. We're just in discussions around whether we put that in place as a permanent visit, including visits to the courthouse. The fall block training was well received by both civilian and sworn members, or our contracted support psychotherapists, Lee, Sky, and Samantha, covered off mental wellness, providing members a better understanding of how mental health is a continuum and how people can be anywhere on the continuum on a given day. They also attended and had baseline meetings with everybody within the police department. So that was well received, and our civilian members were also included in that training. The HR manager attended a week-long training on the constable selection system. So coming from an external outside of policing background, that's the selection system that's used by the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police and covered across the province. So we trained on the use and mechanisms of those systems. And then as well, we had some staff changes. Constable Obolos returned to his training program role after covering for the summer in patrol. Angela Reed will be filling temporary CIB part role in January, and Nate Curry's been temporarily transferred from bail compliance to platoon 4 for operational purposes. We had a part-time dispatcher resign, and we hired 4 new special constables who are listed there. Any questions on the new HR report? Okay.
That's great. Moving on to financial update. Fergus.
So financial update, I have here, this came over. City. Around. As well. So. This is the projected to the end of the year.
Yeah.
This is projected to the end of the year. You see the board is pretty much in line with the anticipated budget. There's an under or quite a bit under in officer salaries because of some vacancies that we've been carrying throughout. We're over slightly on the civilian side as well, over quite a bit on the civilian side, and over on the court security. As I mentioned, we've had increased court security demands. The forecasted was 152,000 below. However, there's a significant wage accrual because we're out of contract at the present time. So the estimated deficit will be about 113,000. But there are some transfers to be made yet in regards to some of the budgets, including 200 on the civilian side. So I anticipate that at the end of the year we'll be in a pretty much even for where we are supposed to be for a based on budget.
And does that include the monies we received from Great County for court costs?
There are no monies for Grey County in the court costs for 2023 budget.
So it would be, because we'll get paid for that in 2025, the year in arrears, as I remember.
Yeah.
So we have,
Right.
basically, we send them a bill in January for what we were short in 2024.
I wasn't involved in any of the discussion around court security funds, but that's my understanding. It's based on the difference between the grant funding and the amount submitted to the ministry.
So at the end of January, when after they've done all the accruals and the adjustments and everything else, it shouldn't look that bad.
Just thinking as we're going through the year and you're looking at court security and we're getting the reports here, you should probably send them up to the financial director of Grey County just to keep them informed as the year goes on.
So it's not a shock.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
Yeah.
yeah, fair enough.
We can certainly do that. No further questions, then I'll move on to the operating report. So my activities for September. And some had a few days off and some work with dispatch. I guess just the highlights would be OPC on September 11th. There was March Past. There was also a keynote address and delivered the speech to the graduates. Largest ever, 498 people graduating
Wow.
that day. And it was an honor to do the inspection of all the recruits and to provide some hopefully meaningful words of wisdom to them. And I appreciated that opportunity. Also participated in the CFOS open line and had a number of good calls on frauds and scams. And 2.5 days with Jeff and Jason at the Safety of Our Cities conference. And that started out last year in Edmonton. And it's for a lot of the major city chiefs, but the focus on it was in policing with homelessness, policing with addictions, and policing with mental health. There were people from all across North America, and there's some really good breakout sessions. And it was nicely developed because there were breakout sessions that wouldn't have applied to us because of the size of the city, but there were also breakout sessions that were very relevant to our the size of our community. And we participated, and we just kind of split ourselves up and went to different sessions, but it was a really well run and very focused on, you know, what is the role of police? How do we change that role of police? How do we make changes? What are some of the ideas that other people are using now? And how can we implement that here? So, and one of the topics of discussion that came out of that, and that we were talking about small and mid-sized chiefs, is the way that we're looking at addictions and mental health. And, you know, we've gone forward with the direction from the Public Prosecution Service of Canada that we're not going to be, you know, proceeding with the possession charges. And we're all of the opinion that that direction hasn't really worked that well. And it's time to take a look and take a closer look and decide whether or not if that's the correct way to keep moving forward. And we have a lot of complaints and a lot of issues with public drug use. And as a policing community, it's more important that we, you know, keep their community safe than it is that we follow the direction coming out of public prosecutions and the government direction. And if it had made a significant impact and there were less people who are succumbing to drug toxicity, that's one thing, but certainly we haven't seen any of those results. So we're moving in a different direction as far as enforcement goes.
Good.
Also highlight the Diversity and Belonging Conference that took place in the Bayshore. That was run through Owen Sound Police Service, Jason Crane, and Mark did a lot of work as well. And that was a partnership with the local immigration, Ray Bruce, the local immigration partnership, and the YMCA. And it was a really well attended event. I think there were a couple hundred people there in the Bayshore, and there were a lot of good discussions around how to make this a more accepting and belonging community. So I was very happy to put that on, and our Yippee students did a very good presentation there to all the members in attendance at that breakout session about their roles and the role that they provide and the role of police provide, and how surprised they were coming into that job about the involvement of the police. Of September, October, attended the OSPSB Small and Mid-Sized Chiefs in Kingston for 2 days. That was some of the discussion around how we're going to keep moving forward with fixing our homelessness issues. Quite a bit of dispatch on Sound Emergency Communication Center time that month, and we had an interesting meeting with Bright Shores in the emergency hospital emergency room. Policing meeting, and some of the changes that they're making to try and streamline the ER and how that's going to affect policing, and how that hopefully should affect some of our wait times. That was the goal of the meeting, was them to explain how they're changing, but also for us to explain how we need to make sure that we are included in that. And it improves for not just the public, but it also improves for the police partners. And then we had our appreciation event for our staff at Hartwood, and that went over very well. Much appreciated by the members. And that's
Just maybe the line item there that talks about West Corrigan resolution, just to update Bev on what's going on there.
yeah. So pardon me, I'm trying to do two things at once. City Council from Old Sound Police have indicated an interest in pursuing some efficiencies in policing. And so we had a preliminary meeting. We're just working on terms of reference and what that's gonna look like, and then come back to councils to set up some type of a oversight and structure and get the proper people around the table for that in terms of reference and decide whether we're moving forward with that.
Moving on to, let's see, next item I have is the renovations update, but it looks like we're going on to Crime Stoppers at Grey Bruce Simcoe. And it just,
I don't think there's anything on there. It's
just verbal, okay.
Guess so. Dave, you can provide their last formal update on the comm center rental, I guess, hopefully.
Well, as Jeff commented earlier, we are now in, and surprisingly, we've had very few issues. Since going live, we always expect there to be some hiccups, but it's actually been very smooth. Everybody's up and running. As Jeff mentioned, feedback's been very positive. Everything with the construction now is closed off, except for a couple of really tiny little things like some caulking and that really are insignificant in terms of getting those done. So I believe we are there. We're still in discussions with relation to some of the consoles and what that's going to look like in terms of the bill that we received for it. But I think that yes, we're there.
Excellent.
It's taken a long time, but we're there.
And I'll note that it's on budget and within the contingencies weren't, we don't anticipate they'll all be spent. So.
Yeah, we're slightly below, which is also, I think, unusual. So.
Yeah, this just for some background started before I got here in 2019, discussions about upgrading the comm center.
Fantastic.
And then it was what, 2 years ago, we finally came to the board to approve it.
January
21
or 2.
And then it finally was approved and started construction this spring.
Yeah. The tender went up to last December and it started in spring.
Long time coming, but it's looking good. Now that we've got the capacity, we start looking for more business.
Yeah.
But just an update on Crime Stoppers. We've had some rumblings within Crime Stoppers for Grey Bruce that they're having problems with funding. Peter sent this to me just to indicate that we're not the only area that's having problems with funding. I think at our last meeting, we said that we would contribute up to including $2,500 from the Owen Sound Police Service, a portion of that being from Triton, we do records checks for us, and $8 for each record check they would provide, just donate to the charity of our choice. We chose that one. And whatever the balance was to bring it up to the 2,500, conditional upon them being able to receive funding from the other detachment boards in Bruce Grey area and the other municipal police services. So, but this was just sent to me, because I asked him, I said, is this just unique to Bruce Grey? And he said, no, it's a province wide. And Kitchener, I think, is shut down, and London is almost there.
We're getting feedback, whether it be the Eric Hour, just about anything that is not for profit. The fundraisers are quiet. People aren't coming out. They're not raising the money they did a year ago, the year before. Seems to be people are watching their wallets a little bit more, not going out as much, and everyone is feeling the pinch in the whole region. So
Yeah.
This isn't a surprise.
It isn't a surprise.
Yes.
All right, moving on to some auxiliary resignations.
Yes, quickly, I'll cover that off. Part of this relates to, and I'll call it some free legal advice that came out of a conference. So one of the things that was discussed very briefly was just in terms of resignations, where from a legal perspective, a resignation is transactional in nature. And this would apply for retirements, resignations, and those sorts of things where ultimately it's an offer of resignation that requires basically a closure piece for the board being the employer to officially accept that resignation to close the loop on it. So I think moving forward, whether this becomes a standing report that may come from HR, but what I'm suggesting here is we've had 2 auxiliary resignations within the time period. Because those are appointments as well. 2 members have moved off to successful obtaining employment within the policing sector. So what I would ask going forward is that the board would move to accept those resignations and that a brief correspondence would then be directed to those members confirming that the board has accepted their resignation and wishing them all the best.
So would you like a motion then from the board, someone to move that we accept the resignations?
I suspect.
Okay,
Yes.
Ian?
Yeah.
Thank you. Second, Bev,
Sure.
thank you. All in favor? Carrie? Okay. Thanks, Anita. And we'll get a letter out to them. Moving on to item D, the operating plans progress update, number 3.
Yeah, so the board completes a operations plan and the police services kind of talk about how we implement that. And so the current business plan or operations plan outlines. There are 14 goals and 50 specific actions in regards to community safety, community well-being, our members, and sustainability. So this is just a progress report update number 3 from August of 2024. And we had a full agenda the last time, so we had to defer it. But each action has a position and designated position and person accountable for it. And so if you look through this is the third 6-month progress report where most or 92% of the actions in the progress are in progress as of the midpoint of the plan's 2nd year. As shown there in the attachments, there are tremendous efforts going through and getting these moved forward. Especially when we've had a number of other significant activities in the first year and a half, like the homicides that took up all of our resources. So a few highlights. January 2024, Owen Sound Police was awarded a 3-year bail compliance and warrant apprehension grant. That's over. Not cooperating. Sorry, it's not cooperating with me, so I'm just gonna move the screen over there. So that grants allowed us to really move forward and making arrests, executing warrants, and we also reached out to a team at Carleton University with the researchers, and we initiated a study to address identified gaps in the community with purpose of better understanding the gaps and obstacles to obtaining service. That was conducted over the summer. I met with the lead on that, and they're just doing the data compilation right now. We should have a report sometime early in the new year. We also received a 3-year grant from the Ministry for Raising Cultural Awareness and Eliminating Hate in Owen Sound. And those funds are supporting the work of Community Services Officer and building and fostering relationships with community groups, which touches on a number of the areas of focus in our plan. One of the events was a workshop from the Simon Wiesenthal to our members and members of the other services locally, as well as social media and awareness and training. We've hired a new HR manager position, and that was created and built in June of 2024. That certainly moves forward, and we've taken on the responsibility for a number of these areas that prior to that we had nobody. For an organization of 100, we had no HR capacity. We did things all off the corner of our desk, so that was a big step forward for the service. We launched the new external Owen Sound Police Service website in March 2024, along with and that's a piggyback with the city and their new website. And we worked together with them to get that in mind, and it now provides the sergeants the ability to post media releases 24/7 with public safety in mind, and promote road safety information and get our message out there better. And that touches on a number of initiatives. We have renovations for a new modernized workspace for the Owen Sound Communication Center, touching on a number of those, and Grey County committed to reviewing the cost of port security, which is currently covered. So that was one of the issues that was brought up in sustainability. And there have been some challenges in moving some of these actions forward. The ongoing major investigations in CIB have consumed resources and time. So some of the actions related to those areas are lagging behind, but we have been, like, as I said, we've started most of them 92%, so we're well on track to meet our goals by the end of the term of the plan. Any questions on the update at all? Anyone?
Very good. Moving on to the next item, we have illicit drug use.
Yes, so I asked the chief if it would be okay if I put something together, just because I think there's been some developments. I think it's important for the board from the governance role to sort of understand what things look like here locally in Owen Sound. So I've been on the Provincial Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police Substance Advisory Committee for like probably more than 10 years now. Anyway, what I wanted to put together, I've thrown some stats in for you. First is the caveat to say that the stats that we track are police stats. They may differ from public health stats and that sort of thing, but where our stats come from, or where I look at a overdose involved death is one that we've gone to, and it looks very obvious to the investigators, whether it's drug paraphernalia, the evidence of recent consumption and that sort of thing. Some of those may change or may not change based on toxicology that comes in from postmortems at the coroner's office, which can sometimes take months to come in. There are, I would say, if anything, the numbers that I put down here are potentially underreported, only because it is only the deaths that the police become involved in. So if we go on to death in the home, but for example, I think, as I said there, if some random citizen drops a person at the emergency door that's in the middle of an overdose and they die, the police, become involved in that. It solely resides with health. So I think there's some really significant numbers that we need to look at there. So I've kind of listed what we've covered off in our CIB reports over the last 5 years, from 2020 to 2024. And to me, it's a little bit shocking when you look at the line below that. It says a total of 52 persons within just the city limits of Owen Sound have lost their lives to drug poisoning within the last 5 years. We did see a spike. One, I think the much smarter people than me are still trying to figure out what that was obviously the height of COVID, and I think they're still trying to see what those drivers were that drove the spike that we saw during COVID. But unfortunately, you'll see we dropped in 2022, but we have continued to increase, and I'm going to say 2024, currently sitting at 13 as of early November with a couple of months left. We're either probably on par, unfortunately, to meet or exceed the big year of 2021. So we're not moving in the right direction. On that, I added some perspective down here. So current stats would indicate that 22 Canadians per day lose their lives to drug poisoning, and of that 22, 7 are in Ontario. So looking at current population levels, that means that your overall chances dying from drug poisoning in Canada, 1 in 4,981, and it decreases to 1 in 5,636 if you look just at the Ontario stat. In Owen Sound in 2024, that means your statistical chance of dying of drug poisoning increases with our stats to approximately 1 in 1,500, or just under 4 times more likely than the provincial average here in Ontario. So we often recognize that, yes, we do have issues in Owen Sound. We often like to say they're issues that are shared across the province, but there's certainly areas in the province that are being hit a lot harder than some others, and we would be one of those, unfortunately. I threw in here, we've already discussed, we had 3 homicides within a 6-week window, very time consuming. 2 of those 3 homicides that we had in 2023 are related to illicit drug trade that occurs here. The substantial workload that comes from those homicides means that it is all hands on deck for us in terms of, I always say that in policing, we don't have any reserve officers that we pull out of the closet when a big spike comes in or something happens. We're staffed for what we typically receive, and whenever we have something that creates demands, it means officers are pulled from doing something else, and there's something that we're not doing in order to be able to deal with those things that do come up like that. Unfortunately, one of the many officers that we had to redivert here over the last year and a half was our drug officer, who would normally be working on proactive drug enforcement. So, you know, unfortunately, it becomes a catch-22 where you say 2 of our homicides are drug related, but our ability to work on enforcement related to drugs goes out the window as a result of having to do those investigations. So, it did say it's not all doom and gloom. I did want to highlight the SOS program that's happening here in Owen Sound. Some of you are probably aware of it, but it's the Supportive Outreach Services program that combines healthcare and social services, including a mobile outreach team. It is a little bit unique in the province, even to the point that they won the 2024 Ontario Health System Quality and Innovation Award for their success in improving health outcomes for marginalized people in the region. So we do have, I would say, some advanced supports that are happening here. And I also pointed out that in 2024, Grey County EMS an application for some grant funding, became only 1 out of 12 locations across Canada to receive some significant funding to implement a drug checking service. So essentially, local EMS here has been able to obtain a unit called a scatter device, which uses ion scanning to do non-destructive testing of drug samples very quickly to be able to determine what the makeup is of those drugs. And I would imagine with the competitive process that happened for that grant, to say that Owen Sound became 1 of 12 locations across the province, assuming that the selection for that was based on need and demand. So that, I think, tells you something as well. And then part of what drove me to do this report is probably that last paragraph, which is very concerning to me. November 8th, our officers attended a non-fatal overdose. And it was rather unusual in that 4 doses of naloxone had to be applied to bring that person back, which is a lot of naloxone. The officer seized the drugs that were at the scene, believed to be fentanyl. And I had one of the officers take that up to EMS to have a look at that and go, what's going on with this? So EMS was able to use their unit, and what that analysis said is that in addition to fentanyl, for the very first time here in Owen Sound, an unusually large concentration of xylazine was found, which is a veterinary tranquilizer. I'm not going to, what I would encourage you and the board to do when you do have a moment is to simply go on and into the internet. You'll find there's a CBC article that was done, I believe, in December 2023 that spoke to what that means in terms of xylazine entering your drug supply. There's a lot of data that's come from down in Philadelphia and a couple places like that where it's already been in. It is an absolutely horrendous addition to what is already a horrendous drug, being fentanyl taking lives. Xylazine, unfortunately, is very likely to increase our fatality rate because xylazine is not an opioid, which means naloxone does not reverse its effects. That's likely why we saw the 4 doses to bring this person back. The big one that you'll see if you look at that article too is one of the unfortunate side effects of xylazine is it causes wounds at the location where it's done, and in that population, the CBC article is actually very interesting because it shows down in Philadelphia where they've actually had to not only have their drug outreach, but they have wound care going around. And you know, as bad as it sounds, it talks about, especially in the summer months, where they have to go and clean the maggots out of the wounds that are on the people on the street that are coming from the xylazine present. And it causes necrosis at the injection site, and they're also seeing amputations and that sort of thing that are starting to happen. So, not good news, but you know, this is what we're fighting. And I do appreciate that, you know, we are only one part of the puzzle with respect to the drug piece, you know, and we've got some very good services operating up there. But what really hits me is when you look at those 52 deaths, and you know, we talk about the homicides. We'll have a homicide here, and we'll literally spend thousands and thousands and thousands of hours on a death that was because it was caused by a knife or a gun or that sort of thing. But 52 people here have died as a result of somebody peddling poison to them, and we report a number, you know, and when we have the bodies, we do our best to work on enforcement initiatives, but, I guess I'll get off my soapbox at this point, but, I just thought that that would be valuable for you to know what's currently happening here in the community
Thank
and
you.
significance when you add 5 years worth of deaths together and go, there's 52 people in a population of 21,000 that aren't here anymore because people are preying on them. You have any questions?
I have a question through the chair.
Yeah.
Was to do it properly. Here we are. Do they have an idea of the new source? Certainly what I heard in Mexico was another story of the source, therefore the impact of the poison being added onto the poison.
I can only speak anecdotally, not necessarily related to local, but when fentanyl first started coming in around 2016, 17, it was believed that the primary source was, Asia.
Yes,
And that was coming through the mail system. Because of a little bit better interdiction efforts that's happening there, that's, I think what's happened over the years is local sources has kicked in for that. The challenge with fentanyl is it's purely chemical in nature. So when you go back to the days of cocaine and that sort of thing, it had to go through a whole lot of importation schemes and the opportunity for interdiction as it came up from South America or wherever that happened to be made. The sad part now, when you get into the chemical derivatives, is they can be made in a lab. And yes, that is the most recent thing that I've heard is that's now taken over a lot of the cocaine trade down in Mexico, and that is certainly a source down in the States as it's coming up from the southern border. But if you look at it from a drug dealer's perspective, it's the risk of interdiction is a heck of a lot lower when you simply have to open a lab as opposed to go through the whole growing agricultural process, transport, and that sort of thing. And the money is, it's a lot cheaper to produce fentanyl than it is to produce cocaine or those sorts of things too. So you can read lots about the opioid crisis here in Canada and it's throughout the States as well too. This is just highlighting, I think, some of the local impacts of what we're seeing here, and they are significant.
thank you. Well,
Thanks, Dave. All right, moving.
Thanks.
No, likely spam, it's. Moving on to item F. We have our meetings for draft list of meetings for 2025, and we don't need to make a decision on this today. It's just giving them to you to look in your calendar and see if they work for you and see if there needs to be any changes, and we'll approve them at our December meeting and subsequently post them to our website so everyone at the public knows. Item 18, termination of public meeting. Having completed all of the business listed on the agenda, I hereby terminate this meeting. Thank you for coming, everyone. Appreciate it.
right.
Gentlemen, thank you, Sunit.